right, I'm going to get started with some housekeeping notes. Thank you all for jumping in. We've got quite a bit of the US covered here, which is exciting. So thanks for joining our session, Search Differently, Adapting to the Landscape Change in Student Search, featuring my colleague, Scott O'Kander. Before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping notes. This session, just like all the others today and for the rest of the conference, will be recorded and will be accessible to you all post-conference, so no worries there. All session attendees are on mute and off camera, so no worries if you are multitasking. We cannot see you. While the video streaming service does offer chat in Zoom, we do urge you to engage with the Q&A in the Whova app. We'll be monitoring both throughout, so feel free to ask questions and we'll tackle those at the end, but it's a little easier to engage in Whova. So try to do that if you can. If you run into any issues at all with sound, audio, technical difficulties, whatever it is, you can send an email to marketing@carnegiehighered.com. You can also engage with us through the Ask Organizers Anything section of the community board, whichever is easier for you. And finally, we encourage you to be as social as possible throughout the session, utilizing the hashtag #TheConnection and then @CarnegieHQ to engage in conversation. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to Scott O'Kander to jump into our session today.
Thank you, Jamie. I really appreciate it. Hi, everyone, and good afternoon. I'm Scott O'Kander. I'm one of the founding partners and chief leadership strategist here at Carnegie. And I'm talking today about one of my favorite topics, which is really thinking about enrollment search and how it's changing based on the landscape changing in higher ed and how we as enrollment leaders have to think about adapting our strategies to student search as a result of all the changes. So really fantastic to be with you today. I wish we were here in person, but I'm calling in from the hotel conference room in Ohio. My normal home in Bend, Oregon is vacant at the moment as I am not there. So it's great to be with you and look forward to your questions and a great presentation and discussion after. I want to talk today about the beginning of our student search change and why we're even talking about change in student search. And the reality is that pressure forces change. You know, we're in a space where so much has happened. And even just the last few years, let alone the last couple of decades, to really force us to start to rethink how we're looking at student search in this moment. So if we look back in time, just as a quick refresher, we look back in the 90s and the 2000s, and this is what I would call the glory days of student search, the top of funnel era. I myself was a vice president for enrollment at this time, and it was a lot of fun to do. And that the main strategy was really just, as I would say, you know, you put enough names in at the top and out popped at the bottom with some pretty good activity and an effort, a matriculant class that led you to something close to what you planned in your goals. You know, we get to that sort of post-recessionary enrollment boom in 2010, and CRMs are coming online and smartphones are active. And we get into this period from like 2013 to about 2020 where we start to see a real change in the way that search is conducted. We see what I call the growth fracture period. You know, Carnegie at the beginning of this is introducing digital to higher ed for the first time. We see grad boom as a real activity. The chief marketing officer is becoming a mainstay role on many cabinet tables around the country. And we see institutions starting to grapple for the first time with a traditional audience that isn't behaving in a way that is or would be considered normal in the previous eras. And so we see increased competition and geographic expansion becoming something that a lot of institutions at different various points within the enrollment operation and within different institutional quality levels, trying to do different things to gain enrollment. And by 2018, we sort of reach our enrollment peak. And that is where the growth era sort of reaches its sort of reluctant end, and we start moving into a different period in time where we see, market consolidations, we see campus closures, we see mergers, and we see restructuring of many institutions far and wide. And that process continues today. So if we look at what's happened in just recent years, we sort of see ourselves at the beginning of a different era within higher ed. This is the first time since the 70s that higher ed is really entering what I would refer to as an industry-wide market share era. This is now a highly competitive era where there aren't enough students to go around. And we're now starting to try to figure out, okay, how do we work maybe against each other instead of with each other as we had done in the previous generations. And so what we see now is institutions doing rapid geographic expansion, competitive repositioning, brand development projects. We see segmentation playing a huge role today and personalization, all to cater to a buyer that's really changed fundamentally in the last few years. We also see coming out of the pandemic, many institutions going into this era of rapid programmatic and modality expansion, and even audience expansion, looking at things like adult markets, which were at one point just hands off to now, hey, I need this market to really figure out how to sustain my operation. And so all of these things that I mentioned there are really being done just to sustain what is enrollment these days. And just to highlight with a finer point, the sort of end game here, the market share era, as would be projected by the WICHE data and other sources, is going to end sort of in the mid to upper 2030s at this point. And so we're looking at a prolonged mega trend around market share, sort of dynamics that really do make us, push pause and think about how do we do this differently moving forward. Coming out of the pandemic, I really call this the sort of the pile on. We already had all of that happening. And of course, before the pandemic, we were talking about the demographic cliff of 2026, which was such a big, sort of moment in time, many institutions looking at that as the sort of criticality event of our generation. But really, in a surprise, the pandemic actually accelerated all of the tendencies that we would have seen in 2026 and just moved it forward by a few years unexpectedly. And so the reality is now we have this dramatically increased competition. We're all, working and looking after the same type of students with less students to go around. We see demand compression happening at a more rapid rate. Just as one point of evidence of that, 22% is the number of students who are not enrolling. Increase in the number of students who are not enrolling in college right after high school. That's a huge increase. Almost a quarter of students who consider don't enroll right away. And we see in influx of that the number of gap years that students are taking in different types of transitions and different types of pathways that our students are taking, reducing even more the demand of available students out there. At the same time, we see things like generational value shifts. So we see, the impact of, social media and the culture wars. And we see things like wealth transfer, where lots of assets are flowing from boomers and traditional age populations down into millennial and Xer populations, now the parents of the students of today. We see increases in data privacy laws and regulations and shifting data standards that are really driving a lot of changes and strategies for many of us as enrollment leaders in the industry. At the same time, we have technological sort of breakthroughs. We have AI, we have data richness. In general, data richness becoming more and more pronounced and more valuable as we see with the consolidation of many markets, especially in the lead generation category. A lot of data is becoming ubiquitous and shared among many sources. So how do we, sort of use data in a more rich and dedicated way to be able to unleash a better result for search? And all of these things are just happening as part of a pile on today. We could look at factors like higher interest rates and geopolitical uncertainty, certainly the recent events in Israel and Ukraine as examples, as well as environmental uncertainties and events that are happening on what seems now a regular cycle of tragedy in relation to sort of environmental disasters and things like that that cause a different kind of relationship with society among today's student generations. And so we have, as a result of all of this sort of timeline effect of where we are, we have these sort of key trends that are happening that are really ones to pay attention to as we think about how to redefine search moving forward. Just looking at I mentioned the 22% number earlier, the drop in students enrolling in college directly from high school in 2022, huge numbers. We also see things like, 35% of college-age students report that they tend to distrust educational institutions. These are dramatically different numbers than were just a decade ago in the way that students thought about colleges. We see 1 million fewer test takers in 2023 compared to 2019. And we see the average discount rate at institutions rising to 55% for full-time students in 21-22, and more and more and more. And so when you look at the factors, the numbers aren't, if you will, with us as enrollment leaders to be all successful in this space. We actually need to fight individually for our institutions and for the value of our institutions with students to be able to matriculate a class that makes sense for our goals. And so trend number one is really thinking about a new reality for lead generation, looking at those privacy laws, looking at things like SCOTUS and the FAFSA changes and the state level DEI regulations that have come to bear in just recent years, and the trends like direct admit and common data sets across many of the lead sources. We have this period of time where what was very comfortable and stable is now very unstable and diversified. And so we're thinking about things like, how do we broaden sources? How do we think about not locking into a single source, but looking at all sources of data and looking at the richness of that data to be able to understand the value. For example, a lead that is just purely a name with an address is no longer as valuable, and never was really as valuable, as someone raising their hand and saying, yes, please send my information to said school. I'm interested in hearing from them. So how do we create a new dynamic within lead gen if the trend is sort of negative against it? I mentioned some of this earlier, but the amount of regulation approaching this industry is becoming pretty significant. You're looking at really significant changes in privacy regulations, not just in higher education, but across the board. You're seeing lawsuits against big data companies, and you're seeing a lot of, sort of uncertainty about what can and should be relied upon in the months and years ahead. You're seeing things like the big change in FAFSA and what that might mean for the yield side of the equation, which is just, by the way, as important as what you do in search, who you search, and what their financial situation is and how you attend to that in your yield strategy plays a role in your ultimate matriculant class for sure. And then we see things like the SCOTUS and state level DEI initiatives that will have a profound effect on a lot of schools and how to attend to things like search moving forward in the enrollment process. We also have another trend where we're looking at sort of values-based purchasing power. So we see a generation that is very focused on politics, society, mission, culture. You saw the stat from earlier. If you read carefully, the number of students that actually make a decision based on a moral conviction is much higher than it was in previous generations. And as a result of that, we see big changes in the way that students attend to which schools they look at and apply to, and et cetera, and even in geographies as well. And then another trend is looking at the rise of a new role in higher ed, the rise of, as we say, student success, thinking about the chief experience officer. We've seen multiple of these becoming real in the last number of years. And we see that schools are really looking at revenue and retention as an equation, that they see retention as a source of revenue. Many schools learned this the very hard way going through the global pandemic, and their focus on the retention side of the campus dynamic wasn't where it needed to be, and they're making changes to address that. And so we see many schools starting to move into more of a customer experience mindset from maybe just sort of a transactional or educational mindset. We see things like experience officers talking about the fact that students have the biggest problems between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m., not on Monday through Friday between 8 and 5. And that's when the office is open. So how do they attend to that and deal with that? And then we have, students making wild swings in their choices after enrolling at a school. And how do schools then become sort of mastery level at understanding the buyer mentality and remarketing the value of schools and creating better outcomes for students so that they stay in it for the long haul? So all of this sort of leads up to just how do we then rethink student search strategy? And what's the approach then if we are moving into a new era? So to think about this, I want to, sort of frame something I've been hinting at here, which is this mega trend of what we would call the buyer controlled funnel. So thinking about a world where for the next about 20 years, the buyer is in control, the prospective student's in control. And you may already be noticing the effects of this by noticing that your prospective student populations, your applications, your admits, your depositors are not following your instructions. You're used to saying, hey, get your application in by December 1 or get your deposit in by May 1. And what you might be finding, or many of you might be finding, is that students don't feel like they need to do those things. They recognize the fact that they are in control of their destiny. They can make a decision later than you're telling them they need to make it. And as a result of that, they have become more empowered in that process. So what does that mean in terms of strategies? We have to think about a buyer-controlled funnel as multi-channel. We have to think about this as not an app stat world where it goes from inquiry to applicant to admit to sort of FAFSA file or to deposit. We have to think about this as a multi-channel universe where the buyer has choices. You may have noticed the fact earlier, but 25% of students report that they found one or more of their schools through social media. So how and in what ways does that influence how we think about search as we move into this sort of buyer-controlled era? We do think this is going to be very yield focused over top of funnel focused. So it's going to be much more about the conversion rates in each stage of the funnel. If we think about it in the traditional funnel sense at all, it's going to be data driven. It'll be nonlinear. It'll be year round. So it won't be, even for the most selective of schools, practically won't be something that can be counted on in all ways. And then really importantly, what we see now is a final infusion where in the 2013 era, where we had the rise of the CMO and the chief marketing officer becoming a force on the cabinet table, now we're seeing that the new way of working is marketing and enrollment actually working closely together to do strategy, both marketing strategy for awareness and reputation and top of funnel and brand development, and enrollment for actual conversion rates across a much more complicated channel strategy in the future. And that those new approaches are going to be segmented in a very powerful way and very personalized, because Gen Alpha and the last of the Gen Zs, they are very much attuned to a personalized experience, and anything that doesn't sort of pass the smell test of that for a higher education institution may bode well or bode poorly for them in the future. And so I think when we think about the buyer controlled focus funnel, we must think about it in a different way. We really have to think about yield focused strategy over big top strategy. So this isn't anymore about going after as many names as you can get in the top of funnel. And this is not to say that there won't be lots of names at the top of funnel, but actually the conversion of those names at each stage of the funnel is now becoming more critical. Why? Because there aren't as many names to go around at the top to generate enough growth for all institutions. This is now a winners and losers market, where market share is going to be won by those who have effective strategies and lost by those who don't. And while that was always somewhat the case in the old Big Top era, it was never really severe like it will be in the years and months and years and cycles ahead, as we think about times when we have double-digit losses in overall numbers of students going around and available to attend college. And we think about every university in the country wanting to, in some way, stabilize or grow their enrollment in some way. And so to me, the opportunity spaces are actually down at the bottom of the funnel, where we look at widening the yield curve between, say, admit and deposit or matriculant in some way. And how do we focus our attention on creating an experience that for students in the recruitment cycle that actually is very tailored and attractive and convertible, so students are converting multiple times as they go from, initial prospect to some sort of deposit or matriculant yield at a school. And so when you really think about funnel management, we have to think of it less like a funnel. Honestly, it doesn't mean the funnel's dead. It still exists. It's still a thing that we can use to track certain parts of our cycle. But we have to be thinking less linearly in terms of static application status and more into a multilinear function, like the example on the right, where the construct of multi-channel and nonlinear sort of plays out. I like to think of it more like looking down into the funnel than looking at it from the side. When you look down in it, you see the complexity and the requirements of both marketing and enrollment to play a great role in converting students to matriculants. And so with all of this new reality, we really need to think about new approaches. And for Carnegie, the way that we're sort of thinking about this is this concept and idea of how do we recruit to retain? How do we do recruiting to retain students ultimately as matriculants? Because if retention equals revenue, then we have to back in from there, back up to the size of funnel we need at the top, the number of names that go in search to yield the right students with the right fit for the student or for the school to be able to have students that stay and ultimately have outcomes at a place. And so strategically, we've put our best minds together and we've thought of sort of a number of guiding philosophies in our approach to student search. And the first of those is that for us, yield is really everything. That, we shouldn't really think about putting a ton of names in the top of the funnel only to have poor yield at the bottom. If we do that, not to say that there isn't some value in having a lot of applications, but if we don't ultimately get matriculants out of it, something is wrong with our strategy to be able to convert from top of funnel to matriculant. And that needs to be addressed in a core sense to be successful. Another thing we're at a period in time where with the modern CRMs like Slate and Salesforce, et cetera, we're at a place where search can be and should be, in our opinion, university owned. Doesn't mean that it needs to be run by universities in all cases, can be run, but it should be owned. This should not be an area where you have a black box of information where you cannot see the conversions that happen from a purchase name along the way to becoming an applicant. You need to know those little micro conversions to better understand how your university's overall awareness and reputation affect the conversion rates that you have at all points of the funnel, especially the top of the funnel. Just the core philosophy that students are in control, that if we think of this world now from now until maybe the end of 2030, the 2030s, a time when students are really going to be in a buyer's market. They're going to have lots of choices. Imagine a student this year that is part of a direct admit program in one of the many states that have started to go this way, that are receiving up to 10 admission letters this month or next saying, hey, I know you didn't show any interest in our institution, but you're in. Congratulations. What kind of world will it be when students have that kind of buying power to be able to make the choices that they'll make moving forward? That sort of leads us to this idea that the cycle isn't going to be sort of driven by a specific date. We're not going to kick off when Common App starts on August 1 and end when matriculants happen. It could be that some schools on the call here today are going to be recruiting well into the drop ad period. And beginning to cycle the beginnings of next year's class already now, in effective strategies, which many of you do today, and that's only going to get more complex as we move forward. Fundamentally, for Carnegie, we believe that's sort of psychometric theory. So using sort of psychology-based approaches, so highly emotive attraction strategies and powerful segments based on psychometrics is the way to drive key results. And that is sort of driven by our company's belief and results that we've had with many of our current clients in the space. And we also believe too that authenticity is in a world where prospects are really values driven, that authenticity and personalization is going to be really key for us. So it's not just about meeting their major interests today and using a segment to drive the fact that they want to be a communications major today, because tomorrow they're likely, in fact, very likely to change that idea. It's about understanding who they are, communicating emotively based on those factors, and using an authentic attraction strategy that can really be delivered. As I say, the brand promise of an institution needs to be met with the brand performance of the institution. We need to find ways to make those connections for students in the recruiting process. And then because we believe so strongly and see so strongly strategically in the multi-channel, nonlinear structures of today's search, we have to meet those audiences in kind. So we have to be where they are. So we're going to be in less of a world where student search is driven by our past strategies and more about looking at where buyers are, how to meet them in that channel, and how to meet them in that channel in a way that's authentic and personalized to them. And so in short, our focus is really to find a way to be recruiting to retain, finding the way to start from the very beginning, thinking about that student as a sophomore in college or a junior or a graduate, and thinking about how we back in from that by being as authentic and attractive as we can with what can truly be delivered in a brand performance way. And so in short, we kind of think about a world where when you think about student search strategy, you're thinking about connecting a lot of things. We kind of envision this as sort of a hive mind approach. So we're all bees working together for a common goal, and there's a lot of different channels to manage, a lot of different elements that we have to put together that have to connect and not be disconnected as they often were in the generations past. And so what Carnegie has done to sort of simplify this for our clients and for the market is to try to think about how do we, as a leading strategy firm within enrollment management, start to think about how to put student search together effectively. And so what we've done is use the hive mind concept and come up with essentially 6 elements that we think are the most effective sort of hive-minded strategies that you need to consider in your search strategies moving forward in the years ahead. And the first of those is, this element of prospect acquisition. So we have to get much more focused on rich data and multi-sources of data as we move forward. And we have to release ourselves of the habit that many of us have found ourselves in, where we're buying a certain number of names for a certain number of dollars in a certain type of structure for search. And instead moving into a world where we're very open to what prospect acquisition looks like, what channel it's found in, what source it's found in. Maybe a world where we have no cap on the number of names we may purchase in a given year based on how everything's performing, what is happening within our markets, and what the actual results are in a given period. There's no reason to sort of wait for a failed year to generate an effective strategy. We need to be thinking about an ongoing evaluation of effective acquisition strategies moving forward. We think about a world where we're in-house with our Slate CRM or any CRM for that matter, looking at how do we do this in a way that we can see how conversions happen from the very point of contact that we make with an acquisition of a name to the actual matriculant and everything in between, because micro-conversions and true understanding of customer relations and relationship management of those customers are the ones that those schools are the ones that are going to be successful in the future. We need to think about a world where we think about yield and retention strategy as much as we think about search strategy. So these are connected ideas and ideologies and not something you do after you finish search with a vendor. We want to be a partner in a way to try to create a view of life cycle communications and think about retention as a strategy while we think about search. Think about how we bundle these things. So instead of having a marketing unit that's doing digital in a silo and enrollment that might be doing some other digital in a silo, we think about this as an integrated idea that's achieving this a central set of outcomes for both marketing and enrollment. And the way that we get there, we think, is through this idea of really careful approach to segmentation and a personalized creative approach. So how do we create a world where we have enough data to be able to reduce the risk of being specific with each prospect in our funnel? And that's kind of the goal that we have at Carnegie of trying to think about student search. We want it to be highly responsive, relevant, optimized, and owned by each one of our university partners. And so when we dive a little bit deeper into this, we really want to think about prospect acquisition as a best practice strategy. So that means it's always evolving. It's always looking at how and when and what sources and how many times. And we want a situation where there isn't a cap, if you will, on name purchases or sources. And so Carnegie has held fast to this with our search clients today, and will continue to do that, where we look at worlds where clients can buy a plethora of names from multiple sources at multiple times throughout the year to feed the exact roles and goals that they have for their enrollment class. We want to be in a place where we can offer clients a proprietary student database. We have our College Express platform and are enhancing many of the features within that platform to be able to be leveraged by our search clients. I mean, we also want to be looking at markets with a lot of intelligence. So we hear far and wide, I do myself, hear from far and wide clients saying, hey, I'm looking at the WICHE data. It looks like Denver or Dallas or Los Angeles or Atlanta are the places to be. But that is only true for a small fraction of schools. Honestly, many schools can find growth markets or markets that are adjacent to their current core territory to be able to grow their student population. But they need to be more intelligent about analyzing those markets, looking for the viability of those markets, and then carefully approaching their go-to-market strategy for those markets to not waste the valuable time of admissions counselors on the ground without any knowledge of a place with new prospects. We think about in-house CRM. You know, we think about this idea of setting up campaigns, building, as I say, building really fast and focusing our clients' energy on strategy for refinement, right? How many of us are stuck today building in Slate and building and building and building and never can get our heads out of the build long enough to know how beautiful a thing we have and what we need to do to sort of make it even more perfect. And so being the kind of partner that wants to build for our clients so that they can actually be in the role of refinement and working together on the strategy for refinement is something we care about. And just as important as doing search well is actually thinking about life cycle communications. So whether you're interested in just prospect development or inquiry development, or you're interested in looking at the totality of best practices of communications flows from the beginning of a relationship with a prospect to the end of their matriculation or their end of their first year, we want to be a partner for you that can serve all of those elements. Doing it in a psychographic way, in a segmentable way. And there are some different options that Carnegie has today to be able to serve different institutions' needs. So one of those is through our motivator program. So national profiles that can be quickly assumed and utilized to drive specific psychometric performance against a national database. Or if you're inclined to go much more specific, individual and customized psychometric profiles for your institution that don't rely on national data, but instead harness national data against your actual student history and begin to look at the custom relationships that certain personalities have with each institution. We call that darts, if you will, something that many schools in our search space utilize effectively. But either way, we want to be in a place where we can use advanced segmentation strategies to drive higher conversions, because we know the top of funnel will be weaker in the years ahead. We need to begin to look at the optimizations we're using at each part of the funnel moving forward. To do that, we think a lot of our world will be in this area of personalized creative. This isn't about creating the perfect envelope window with the logo in the left corner. This is about creating true affinity and true personalized communications and creative that meets the needs of what's attractive to a student and authentic to an institution. And that's also in many respects about this concept of how do we personalize the experience, even in web, through programs like our Clarity platform, where we can personalize content based on specific actions required or specific programs or specific needs that each institution have. And how we keep the website and web pages updated and refreshed to be able to stay current with a prospect that might be with you for multiple years in this type of sort of market share economy for higher ed. And then another little piece of this puzzle is to do digital and to do it really well. And as many of you on the call know, that Carnegie brought digital to higher ed, and we maintain an industry best portfolio of digital experts. We are one of the industry's only Google Premier partners, but we also are a Premier partner with places like TikTok and Snapchat and LinkedIn and Facebook. And our capability is unmatched in this industry to do the precision-based digital that applies to today's modern search exercises. And so whether that's doing fully optimized digital campaigns for you, or whether that's multi-channel, multi-format strategy to truly drive specific outcomes for your type of student, Carnegie is really building in its digital expertise into search in a way that will truly help institutions maximize the enrollment performance they have. And the last little piece here, I think last or second to the last, is this idea of how to optimize yield. So really thinking about yield through multiple points of operation. So not just looking at it from a perspective of how to create a great comp flow, but also looking at how do we lead score and create engagement scores for prospects to help a staff know who to focus on in a given window, and what message to send based on the psychometrics. How do we maybe look at things like financial aid, which was another huge variable in the equation, and look to take out the sort of antiquated model of sort of pure linear regression, and start to move into a place where if the buyer's in control, individualized aid modeling is probably a much better way to sort of look at how do you truly convert and maintain both the maximum matriculant population and the maximum revenue that the institution needs to sustain itself in such difficult times. That may lead over to things like student success modeling, where we're looking at how do we retain and retain at a higher level. Looking at operational audits beyond just search, because the best search strategy can be and will fail a poor execution audit or a poor execution strategy by a team that just may be unaware of the lack of best practices in a particular area. And our approach is really to try to figure out how do we create a strategic team with a partnership mentality with clients. We're so proud of the fact that so many of our clients come back to us year over year without requiring a long-term agreement. While we will always honor that idea, we're also open to whatever type of agreements we need to make moving forward. And so just to leave you with something, a little bit of a taste here, Carnegie has thought through very carefully how to think about search strategy moving forward. And we welcome your further conversations. But one of the things we've done is to sort of realize that not every client is the same. So why treat them all that way? Right. So some clients need and want and desire a full life cycle approach to their enrollment operation. They want a true strategic partner. And that's what we have here on the right side of the screen in the enhanced model. And some clients just want us to do the very basic of name by consultation and inquiry development for maybe a single campaign. Maybe it's something new like an adult campaign. And so we want to give ways of thinking and strategies of bundling that help clients understand that we have a lot to offer this industry, and we have a lot of ways to approach the best practice based on your specific needs. And so whether it's a basic model or something very full life cycle and partnership minded, or whether it's our core enterprise and search and just a really great way to do student search, for sophomores, juniors, and seniors. This is something that you can rely on and know that it can be there for you as a key strategy moving forward. And so with that, I'll kind of stop and I'll kick it over to Jamie to see if there are any questions. And I'm happy to have a dialogue with you. Hopefully this has been really valuable for you to sort of listen to our thoughts about the future of search. And we welcome further conversation anytime.
Awesome.
Jamie?
Thank you so much, Scott. So we do have a couple of questions, and I urge anyone that's still listening on the chat, definitely throw them in there if you have additional questions as well. But this was a question from Zoom. What recommendations would you have for retaining early deposits matrix? And how do you maintain quality engagement for a longer period of time in the cycle?
Yeah, those are really good questions. So in terms of retaining earlier deposits and I'm sorry, can you say that? I just want to make sure I get the detail correctly. Can you say that first?
Yeah, we'll start with the first one. It was, what recommendations would you have for retaining early deposits matrix?
Oh, I see. Yes. I think this is actually something that is really also just as relevant for those clients out there that may be exploring a direct admit program. But this idea of an early depositor to your institution that may have a 6 or 8 month window both between the time that they deposit until the time they actually show up on campus, that can be a scary period, especially in a world where market share forces are going to result in a lot of different competitive offers being thrust at that person. We aren't in a world anymore, I guess, when my VP days, where poaching was just considered the ultimate sin of enrollment leaders. We see that happening all the time, every day. And so this is where the psychometric part that I talked about in the custom and personalized communications comes to bear. I think a lot of schools today sort of reach that sort of point of deposit. And for many schools, there's a transitionary element that moves from the enrollment operation to the student affairs or the sort of student life operation at that point. So we start to see, communications that may lag for extended periods of times about orientation and other kinds of factors. And so I would highly encourage schools that are listening into this and thinking about this idea to be very careful with early deposits, and to think about personalized communications and attractive storytelling that exist far beyond that of a deposit. Do not consider a deposit solid until they are sitting in a chair on your campus after drop ad and aren't looking to leave. Right. And so in that respect, you have to think about continuing to recruit a student, not to overwhelm them, but to think about relevant, personalized, psychologically based segmentation that may tell specific stories that are attractive to that type of student and that create a high degree of continued affinity and convertible affinity to the institution through to matriculation. Great question.
That's great. And you kind of already answered this, but if there's anything else you want to add to the second part, which was, how do you maintain quality engagement for a longer period of time in the cycle?
Yeah, I think the sort of tendency is to, under communicate when you've had someone take, no action for a period of time, or you communicate so similarly over and over again. I mean, how many of us can sort of chuckle about the emails we may have sent, 20 times to a student and not having had them react? I mean, that's not Carnegie's way of doing business. I mean, we like to think about ways to change the story, to personalize their experience, even as they may be psychologically changing their mind. And so being in a spot to always think about that next thing that student might be thinking of. I often think about the relevance of, for example, Thanksgiving and Christmas dinner tables, Easter dinner tables, things like that can play a huge role in the sort of continued affinity and engagement with the school, and what you have in place at those times can make all the difference in the way that that students react to you over a period of time. Thank you for the question. Another good one.
That's awesome. And we actually have a lot of votes on this question, so I'm excited to see your answer. Can you speak to how you might modify your recommendations for graduate program audiences instead of undergrad?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. It's a great question also. It's interesting, I've thought a lot about this in recent years, mostly because so many schools are going further in their grad and adult and transfer specific audiences, but specifically for grad, the sort of like a prevailing knowledge or prevailing thinking is that programmatic marketing is really the only thing in grad. And to some degree, there's truth in that the program that a student is seeking is actually the number one thing they're looking for. So grad, unlike undergrad, once they find the program they want, they're going for that. The second thing though, and the most important thing to remember, is the second variable in that equation is actually the strength of the value of that degree or the brand of that institution. And so what often happens with grad is that the programmatic marketing is strong, but the brand communications and the awareness and reputation building of the institution is weak, and it may result in grad conversion loss as schools with savvier programs actually think of both sides of that coin. So don't miss the opportunity to take something like psychometric data and turn it into programmatic marketing that has psychometric elements and segment that student directly past their program and into the reasons why your institution is a great sort of brand for them to get their sort of post undergraduate degree at. So hopefully that's helpful.
That was great. Yep. I think we tackled most of all the questions, which is great. I do have a couple of just housekeeping notes for the end of our session today. I do want to thank you all for joining, and thank you so much, Scott, for your presentation and for your time. It was really, really great content for our viewers today. Again, for all of those that are attending today, keep in mind that we have a number of sessions tomorrow and Thursday as well. So please take a look at that agenda and think about the ones that are relevant to your seat and what you're looking to gain from this conference. We will be starting up again tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Eastern with making accessibility accessible in Slate. So some more content for you all tomorrow. And if you run into any issues, as always, we're very active in our marketing email, which is marketing@carnegiehighered.com. So that is all for us today. Thank you all again for your time. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and please continue to view our content. Thanks so much.
Bye, everybody.